Right now it's actually 10 o'clock, not 10:04. Ugh. That will drive me slightly bonkers, but I'll try to just remember to look at my watch. Okay. So just looking at what's going on this week. So we're going to cover the Thinking Critically About Science lecture. We may need to use some of the class time on Friday to finish it. My idea was just to like pass out the exam and let y'all go, but I'd rather you have the knowledge you need to take the exam. So I will distribute the exam in class on Friday. It will be paper copy. You'll fill it out and bring it back by the following Wednesday. And again, I'll remind you of this a couple different times this week, but a week from today, we'll be over in the library for our session there about finding good sources. So yeah, I think that's where we're at. Sometimes I just have to take a breath and be like, okay, we're good. Okay. All right. So as you can tell, these first few chapters of your book kind of overlap and get at some of the same material. And there's a reason for this. It is to ensure that we're reinforcing things, that we're kind of looking at the same material from different angles, and that we are also just really covering all the nuances of what's going on and the foundation we'll need for what we'll look at for the rest of the semester. I'm just checking y'all off real quick here. And then we'll go ahead and dive in. Okay. So this one's going to be more about evaluating arguments in particular. So when someone tells you something and they're maybe using sources to back it up, how do you tell if that's actually a good argument or not? And so let me go ahead and minimize here, take some of this out of this. So this is Eaton's hierarchy of sources for educational research literature reviews. And so the idea is, what should I be using if I'm writing something for a professional journal, for a class assignment, unless it specifies otherwise? And so the most respected, what we're typically using are those peer-reviewed articles that we talked about how to find on Friday, right? We're going to Google Scholar. We're going to the library resources, any source I think about, and we're finding that. You can also do peer-reviewed conference proceedings. So when you submit to a conference, it is also reviewed by experts in your field. And then some fields, they'll actually publish the papers that were presented at the conference. Now, this varies widely from field to field. Typically, within psychology and other sort of natural and social sciences, we will just have our poster or our PowerPoint for our oral presentation. But in other fields, like the humanities in particular, they will have their entire paper written and read it. And then that will be put into the conference proceedings. Books from credible publishing houses, and especially if those books are edited books. So what an edited book is each chapter is written by a different expert in the field. And then the editors who are also experts in the field are the ones who put it together. Official government or public agency sources like policy documents, official reports. These could include things like the proceedings of Congress, Supreme Court decisions, policy papers put out by various government organizations. And then other highly credible non-governmental organizations, you'll see these abbreviated as NGOs. They're typically nonprofits. And so things like UNESCO or Oxfam, they'll put out expertly written documentation, white papers, things along those lines. So that if you're doing a literature review for, a class paper, or you are going to try to publish something in a journal, at least 80% of the sources you cite in your literature review should be coming from this category. Now, when I publish, I would say 99+% of my sources come from this category. And the few exceptions are when there's something that just is like so up to date, it wouldn't be in there. So for example, if I need up-to-date statistics about how much the beauty industry makes, right? A peer-reviewed journal article might not have that, but there are incredible sites out there with those type of statistics that I can find. Things that you can use in moderation, journals that maybe kind of like everybody gets in, but at least the editor looks it over. Again, edited rather than peer-reviewed conference proceedings. There are these think tanks and research institutes, particularly in the DC area in our country, that will put out pretty good sources. Things that you should use sparingly, maybe just to highlight modern day issues, something along these lines. Include things from reputable news channels, like the BBC, Washington Post, NPR, New York Times, LA Times, along those lines. And again, you're just using that to highlight things, or maybe even show how something was covered. And then things you should not cite in any paper you turn into any professor, certainly not in any paper you turn into a journal. Things like Wikipedia, articles from predatory journals, which are hard to find and figure out what's a predatory journal. In a sec, I'll show you. There are some good lists of those. You don't want to be quoting, what is it called? The Sun, the one that always has like Fat Boy on the cover, right? You don't want to be making sure News of the World, I think that's what it is. Making sure there's some reputableness to it. Don't use this, basically. The exception would be if you were in digital studies, then you might include Wikipedia as a source because Wikipedia might be what you're studying, if that makes sense. So real quick, let me show you an example of these websites. Of predatory journals. So what predatory journals are there journals that will reach out particularly to new faculty members, graduate students, people who want to build up their curriculum vitae, which is the fancy word we use for resume in academics, by having more publications. And they'll say, we'll publish it, and we'll publish it right away, and we'll publish it quickly, but you have to pay us $5,000 to get it published. And so these do exist. And so the couple different lists here. Beals is one of the ones a lot of people refer to. And so you can see they just have like an ongoing list of different names of journals. And unfortunately, these just keep proliferating. And here's another one that focuses on, predatory journals in general. But they have a comprehensive list here. That's broken into 3 parts because there are so many now. And here you go. Things that sound legit. Advances in medicine. That sounds like that could be a legit journal. Typically for academics, the tip off for this, besides the requiring crazy amounts of money and not going through peer review, is if you get a cold email. It's like, I call it academic spam. You'll get this email that be like, Dr. Myers, we've read such and such, and we think that something like this would be great for our journal. And my favorite is sometimes they'll pull up like a book review I wrote. Like, this is great research you did. It's like I literally reviewed a book for a journal. Or they'll be like, here's your research on body image. We think this would be great for our oncology journal. Did you guys even read what I write? Right. So we as academics have to be careful as well. Which is not great, right? We would love if we didn't have to sort of navigate this, but people will find and exploit you. I heard this stat the other day. There's like one of the, and these are not the predatory journals. These are just like the publishing journal houses like Elsevier and Nature, that though a single one of those makes more profit in a year than like Walmart. Okay, so fun fact is a little, again, like you get sidebars in this class. How much do you think authors get paid when they publish in journal? You guys had to get it. None, yeah. Stop it. Sometimes people are like, oh, must be like $500. No, we don't get paid anything. And in fact, if you do want to print like color images, you have to pay for the color printing. So typically people work that into their grants, so that they're not paying out of pocket. But yeah, we get our work out there, we spread the science. Yeah, that's our CV, our institution can feel proud of us. But I don't get paid anything for all the journal articles I publish. In like edited books, it might be different. So like some edited books that I've written chapters for, I got paid a little bit. One, I got paid in credit for the publishing company, which meant I just used it to buy the book, so I had a fee. And the same thing, another edited book I have a chapter in, we got a copy of the book, but like the book was a 2-volume, $600 set, so like that's not too shabby. So yeah, it definitely, you don't go into academia to get rich, let's put it that way. And that being said, I am paid well by Wesley, and I certainly am like living fairly well. So this is another way to kind of look at what type of sources should you be looking at. And we'll just start with the 9 scientific ones that are obvious, right? Like if we're looking for good scientific evidence, we're not going with personal anecdotes, gut feelings, or some guy I know said, right? This is actually one of the most frustrating things to scientists on the internet, is like a lot of scientists are getting really good at science communication. They'll tweet really approachable ways to describe their papers when they came out, you know? And people will be like, well, that's not true, because the one time I did. You're like, oh, that's not how science works, right? And then here is a pyramid of, things that are science publications, from sort of what is the weakest up to what is the strongest. And I realized that this didn't translate very well. It's much clearer on my screen. So the bottom says case reports, opinion papers, and letters. Case reports are where you're just writing about one person or one animal, one school, right? Something along those lines. It's a nice way to start to build evidence, but it's not gonna generalize. You will see opinion papers and letters in academic journals. Again, they're in an academic journal, but they're not always gonna have like as much data behind them. Next up, again, Harvard Reed is animal trials in vitro studies, in vivo, sorry. No, it says in vitro, there we go. So these would be, we're testing a new medication for humans and animals, right? And this is part of what we have to do in order to get something approved, right? Before we ever test a medication in people, we do it in animals. But because that's sort of a first step, it's down further. Now, let's say what you were studying is actually animal behavior, right? Animal studies would be much higher up. Then we have cross-sectional studies. I would say this is the vast majority of correlational or survey studies that are published. So you just give people questionnaires, have them fill them out at one time point, and then you compare among them. And it's called cross-sectional because it's like I took one cross-section of the population at one given time, and this is what I found. And again, a little bit stronger, but we're only looking at one point in time, one subset of the population, so not quite as strong. Next up are case control studies. again, is by control. We're starting to try to control extraneous variables. These would be where you look at one or a couple people who often have something unusual and compare sort of, I'm going to try this treatment on, this one or three people and see if it works, basically. It's like a therapy trial, but you don't have enough people with the diagnosis to do a large scale trial. Next up are longitudinal studies. This is sort of interesting to me because within my subfield, I would say these two are actually switched, but both are very well respected. So longitudinal studies are hard and expensive to do. So the best longitudinal studies will start following people pretty young, maybe kindergarten, and follow them maybe till they're 18 or even beyond that. So you have to keep track of all those people over time. You're compensating the people at each time point. You're compensating your researchers all that time, right? And the nice thing about longitudinal studies is, let's say, again, I always think of sort of my subfield. Let's say I study like body image disturbance when they're 10, and then I look at eating disorders when they're 13, right? If I see that everybody who is high on body image disturbance when they were 10 is having eating disorders when they're 13, that starts to really build strong evidence, right? More so than these cross-sectional studies where there's a relationship, but you don't know what comes before what. Randomized controlled trials are the gold standard for new therapies. And so what you do here is you have a new therapy, you assign one group to do that therapy. The other group is going to be in some sort of comparison, whether it's like placebo therapy or whether it's, sort of what is being used currently in the field. You're trying to see if your new therapy is better than that. I could think of like when I interviewed for academic jobs, I was also interviewing for some postdoctoral fellowships where I would have done research for a few years. And one of the places I interviewed, they had people going through therapy with a therapist, people doing a self-help book that did a lot of the same things that therapy did on their own, and then sort of a middle group of people going through the self-help book but meeting with a therapist once a month. So they were trying to see which is better. Can the self-help book maybe be almost as good as therapy? And then people who can't access therapy can at least get them. And then the strongest are meta-analysis and systematic reviews. So these are where you take existing literature that's out there. So the meta-analysis that I'm hoping to get published in the next 6 months, or at least get submitted in the next 6 months. We have, I believe, over 300 studies that look at the relationship between social comparison and body image. And each of those studies becomes one line of data in our data set. So it's like a study as a person, kind of. And so because you're looking at all the other published data, these are considered the strongest because you can look at trends over time. You can look at, these are really especially important in areas where we often have small sample sizes. So for example, brain scan studies are really expensive to do. And so oftentimes you'll have good brain scan studies published that only have like 20 participants in them. That's all they could afford. And because of that, if you just look at individual studies, it'll be like, this study says this particular part of the brain is related to PTSD, but this study says it's not related to PTSD, right? So by doing a meta-analysis and looking all of that together, you can look at the overall trend and start to answer some of those questions more definitively. It's almost like you now have a sample size of thousands instead of 20. These are a couple of other great resources. They just a couple examples of people who are not scientific evidence. It's kind of cracking me up. YouTube videos in most cases. Mothers know best, i.e. parental instincts. Getting a heartbeat. Andrew Wakefield, who's the guy who fabricated his data and made everybody think that the MMR vaccine causes autism when it doesn't, right? All these weird nutritional and food bloggers. And then they walk through the similar walkthrough we just went through with a little more detail and give you, again, a nice little diagram looking at things in more with more precision. And then if I go back, this one I think is really interesting. Yeah, hopefully I can get this to zoom in. Yeah, well, that's really zoomed in. But what they do is they take all these different news media outlets and they look at them. Let me go back real quick here. Okay, I'm gonna try to reopen this because it zoomed in and won't let me zoom out now. They take all these different media outlets and they look at how partisan they are, and then also like how much of their reporting focuses on actual news as opposed to sort of more entertainment stuff or just making stuff up. That certainly happens for some of these. And it happens on both sides of the sort of political spectrum. So again, for some reason, it doesn't want to let me scan left and right when I do this, which is really frustrating. Trying to see if there's a bar on the bottom. Doesn't look like it. Alrighty. One more time, and we'll just look at it and squint. So, in the middle, you have things like the Associated Press, NPR slants slightly left, things like the Wall Street Journal slant slightly right, but in general, they're neutral, they're reporting facts, and in a lot of cases, they are the ones going out and researching the facts. They're the ones finding the sources, things along those lines. Then you get to stuff on both sides that is not going to do that as much. Things like the Huffington Post on the liberal side, Fox News on the more conservative side. And there are sites that just make stuff up on both sides. There are also sort of like, they break this down by rectangle. So everything within the green rectangle is covering what they are calling news. Everything in the yellow rectangle is doing fair interpretations of the news. Anything in orange, sort of out here to the sides, they're being extreme, pretty unfair in their interpretations of the news. And then the red rectangle is nonsense that is damaging to public discourse. And again, that's things like patriobotics, which I had never heard of before, right? There are things out there on both sides of the spectrum. And they update this every year, typically. So it's worth taking a look at sort of how are these media sources doing each year in terms of trying to stay neutral. And again, you can stay neutral, but still report the actual facts on something, just like we talked about before. If it's raining outside, your job as a journalist is not to get both sides telling you whether it's raining or not. It's to like say, some people say it's not raining, but in fact, we can objectively see and the science shows that it's raining. All right, so scientific literacy, which we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks, involves a willingness to change our minds. And that's really interesting because traditionally, that has not been seen as a good thing in the US. Again, I think y'all were probably either not born or pretty small when John Kerry was running for president, but he had changed his mind about things throughout his career as he became more informed, and they named him like a waffler, and they just said that that was really bad. Like, how dare you change your opinion? How can we trust this person? That type of thing. And we do have psychological processes that we mentioned already that fight against. We don't want to dispose of an idea we find valuable. And life is just easier when you go with the flow, when you don't push back on some of this stuff. Particularly if the people or things you'd have to push back on are, say, family, right? Or religious institutions you've been a part of. So existential theory comes into play here. And so this is a theory that was developed within philosophy, but several big name psychologists took it and applied it to human behavior more concretely. So existential theory is a reaction against this rationalism, science, and the Industrial Revolution. It argued that all those things were making people into numbers, and that people were sort of losing track of their existence. And the purpose of existentialism is to regain contact with the experience of being alive and aware. And so it comes from these root words ex, meaning out, and stare, meaning stand, so standing out in the crowd. Some quotes here, Sartre, the French philosopher, playwright, that hell is other people. Robert Browning said, take love away in our group too. And then Roland May was an existential psychologist, and he said, I think, therefore I. And it was like, fill it in. So that can become part of this, right? Is like, when we take a sidestep and start looking in and start realizing things. And this, I think, in modern times has really transitioned into like the mindfulness movement, right? Meditation, but also just being aware of where you are in the present moment. Then that can also help us to be good consumers of what's going on around us. So we've been talking about scientific literacy in general, but your book specifically defines psychology literacy or psychological literacy, which is the understanding of psychological knowledge and the ability to apply principles of psych science to the challenges of personal, social, and community life. Again, everything we're doing in this class, right? And also what the people who are existentialists want you to do. There's a couple different things that work against us communicating with other people. One is the outgroup homogeneity bias, which is the tendency to overlook differences among members of a group to which we do not belong, our outgroup, and instead to perceive all members as essentially the same. And so this can happen politically, right? Oh, everyone who's not like me politically is XYZ. But in fact, there's a lot of nuance on both sides of the political aisle, right? And even just having two sides of the political aisle is a little unique to the US. A lot of countries have many more political parties, right? And this can also be racial. This can be sexuality, nationality, things along those lines. Everything like, oh, those people, them, they're different than me. An in-group is the group to which we belong, and we contrast that with other groups. And sometimes we may feel competitive against other groups, and sometimes we feel a sense of superiority. And sometimes that sense of superiority is backed up by who gets the resources in society. And an outgroup is groups to which we do not belong. They're often seen as inferior to our group. And again, we do this on color lines, ethnic lines, sexuality lines, gender lines, right? Political lines. And when we do this, when we put other people in an outgroup and we assume they're all the same, we diminish them to sort of less than human. And we make it real easy to dismiss them. And it becomes problematic. So here's a question for y'all. What do you think of when you hear the word terrorist? What's the image that comes into your mind? I mean, today's 9/11, right? So for a lot of folks, particularly sort of older or middle-aged Americans, what they think of are people from the Middle East using planes as bombs themselves, right? So we tend to think of this, right? People who are different than us, who cover their faces, who have these large weapons, right? But domestic terrorism is a thing, right? And certainly on January 6th, we saw that in living color, right? And we're still seeing people go through trials for that. One of the instigators just got the longest sentence. I think he got 20+ years. But domestic terrorism has existed for a really long time. I mean, again, just examples within my lifetime, Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bombing, right? But other groups throughout history doing things to try to disrupt domestic things. And typically, these folks who are domestic terrorists don't look like what we think of when we think of terrorists. And in fact, right now, partially because we've beefed up Homeland Security in the wake of 9/11, these people are the people causing the most deaths, right? These are your mass shooters. These are people who try to bomb things. Dr. Casey, who just left here and has a new job down in South Carolina, about the history and GWSS departments, she posted on her social media that she went to a park in South Carolina, and it was like, when they integrated it for the first time, someone tried to blow up the swimming hole so that people of color couldn't use it. No one could be able to use it, right? But they failed. So this has always existed, and these are people who look like the people in power. And so that we don't think of them in the same way, again, even though right now they are the bigger threat. And in fact, we do have, I believe this is the FBI website. We do have definitions of domestic terrorism on the FBI website. So the FBI does include these folks in their definitions of terrorism. So violent criminal acts committed by individuals and or groups to further ideological gain goals stemming from domestic influences, such as those of a political, social, racial, or environmental nature. And so again, pointing out that these folks can exist on both sides of the spectrum, right? For a long time, there were these, I'm sure there's still some around today, but these folks that they called eco-terrorists, who would go and like bomb offices of people who are going to be engaging in deforestation. Now, instead, what you'll see is people engaging in more peaceful protests, right? But you've certainly seen it on both sides of the aisle. And this can be things like someone blowing up a Planned Parenthood, right? Or, like I said, blowing up a construction company. And it's someone who is a citizen who lives in the US and is perpetrating terrorism, perpetrating this violence. And the point of terrorism is to incite fear, right? And so it doesn't matter who's committing it, it's terrorism. Here's a fun question. How do we know what we know? It's a very metacognition question, right? Kind of makes us think of the Greek philosophers who like told us that the smartest person knows how much they don't know, right? Some definitions from your book, they talk about tenacity and persistence. And tenacity is the tendency to accept knowledge or beliefs because it is comfortable or easier to simply hold on to them, right? This is a lot of times why we don't try to challenge things. And they say the antidote to this is to recognize that the beliefs we hold, no matter how strongly, might need to change. And try to consider the perspective of those who have views counter to yours. And this can be a real challenge because of the outgroup thing, right? Well, those people are horrible. They're deplorables, right? They're less than. This is a great video. So hopefully everybody knows who Bill Nye is. He is a science educator when I was growing up. The big thing was Bill Nye the Science Guy. I don't think he has a doctorate. I think he might have a master's though. And he's going to talk in this video about why he changed his mind about GMOs, that he used to be very against GMOs, and how he sort of adapted.
This is Star Talk. I have a ton of questions from GMOs, and they are all, here's the weird thing, and I don't know, they are all addressed to you. They're saying, Bill, dear Mr. Nye, dearest Mr. Nye, why are all these people asking you about GMOs?
Here's the thing.
Okay.
I wrote a book, a New York Times bestseller, Undeniable Evolution and the Science of Creation.
Yes.
And in that book, I had...
By the way, it's a great book.
I love you, man.
Yeah.
By the way, in that, or the point is, or the thing of it is, in the book, I have a chapter about genetically modified organisms.
Right.
And at that time, when I wrote it, I said, it's always good to be cautious. It's, you don't know what you're going to do to the ecosystem. But this led to controversy because it turns out GMOs, in my opinion, I spent some more time. I met the guy who won the World Food Prize.
Okay.
Rob Fraley won. It's like the Nobel Prize for farming, for
Right,
agriculture.
For agriculture.
And he's, in my opinion, really not such a bad guy. And he believes that we can raise more food than ever on less land. In other words, we have 7.2, almost 7.3 billion people on Earth today.
Okay.
He believes, or his colleagues, believe they can raise food for 9 billion people on 2% less land.
Which is great.
That's a noble goal.
That is a noble goal.
And here's the thing that happened, in my opinion. Monsanto developed something called glyphosate.
Okay.
Or rather, a salt of glyphosate. This is a way to put this chemical onto soil and have it stay there pretty well.
Okay.
Anyway, it kills everything that's green. Kills everything by inhibiting the shikimate acid pathway.
So you're literally salting the earth.
Yes.
So.
Yes. However, what Rob Fraley and these several other guys who were working at Monsanto, they behated Monsanto, what they did is develop a gene that lets the shikimic acid pathway get completed in the green plant anyway.
Gotcha.
And this is the so-called Roundup Ready soybean, corn. Cotton was the first one.
Right.
And there's two things.
So now everybody is familiar with Roundup as a weed killer.
It does kill weeds. It kills any
Right.
green plant.
Any green plant.
With a couple exceptions, which are quite relevant. Anyway, he argues that glyphosate's really not such a bad thing. Compared to all the other herbicides, glyphosate's pretty benign, which I've done research now, and I've decided that's true. I've changed my mind about genetically modified foods. That's the top line.
So it's the top line. You've changed your mind about GMOs.
And so I looked into it. There's no difference between allergies among GMO eaters and non-GMO eaters. There is a big difference in inputs from an agricultural standpoint. Organic farming takes a lot more water, takes a lot more tillage.
Yes.
It ends up, actually, you end up with less diversity of microbes in the soil with modern Roundup Ready crops because you don't have to till, you don't have to turn the soil over to kill the weeds.
Right.
However, there is a notorious weed called pigweed, which is every bit as friendly as it sounds.
Oh, okay.
And
But is it as delicious
spin.
as bacon?
Actually, people used to eat it, eat the leaves of Aranthus plants, but now it's considered a weed because you have to go to a lot of trouble to get the food worth out of it.
Gotcha.
And it has a redundant gene now. In other words, it has evolved over the last couple decades.
Okay.
So that it has it amplified the gene that makes the shikimic acid, and so Roundup doesn't kill it.
It can't kill it.
Yeah. So
now you have a Roundup resistant weed now.
That's what you got. So right now they control it. The adverb is mechanically. They tear it up. They dig it up.
Yeah.
And these guys at
The old-fashioned way.
That's right. The farmers at Monsanto and Pioneer and DuPont, they all tell stories. These are seed companies. They all tell stories. When they were kids, they were farmers, they dug up weeds.
Right.
And it was not really the good old days. So I've changed my mind about genetically modified organisms, and that's why these things have come in. I mean,
Okay.
but I claim, Chuck, that I went about it in a scientific fashion.
This is Star Talk.
And again, like that's the really important point, right? Is like as you get more knowledge, as you get more science knowledge, you can change your mind, and that's okay, right? We don't, well, okay, there are people, well, the vast majority of us don't still think the world is flat, right? There are these flat earthers out there. My favorite thing I've seen about flat earthers is like, how do flat earthers explain cats? Because cats would have just knocked everything off the edge of the earth by now. If you ever had a cat, their favorite thing to do is right. So, you know, we would still not believe germ theory. We wouldn't be washing or sanitizing our hands before interacting with patients, right? There's all kinds of things we would not be doing that have helped so much. And so how do we know what we know? Part of it's personal experience, right? It's a way of knowing and deciding truth based on things we've personally seen or done. However, this is limited, and we know this through our psychological science, that if it's a single experience, a single individual, our memories are fallible. Our memories are not the best. And so even our own personal experiences might not be described that well. And even our perception can be fallible. So this is a little video about change blindness.
You are about to take part in a quick experiment. Take a look at this. Okay, now, did you happen to notice anything odd? Watch again.
It's a different guy.
See any changes? Don't worry if you didn't see that it's two different men. It means your brain is doing exactly what it should be. It's focusing on the meaning of the scene rather than on the irrelevant details. Imagine how much energy and brain mass it would take for us to remember every single person, place, or thing we encountered. The things that matter, a conversation with a coworker, your child's first step, would be drowned by a deluge of information. So when there are minor changes to the world around us, we often don't pick up on them. There are two similar phenomena at work.
Inattentional blindness is the failure to notice something that's fully obvious right there in front of you when your attention is engaged on something or someone else. Change blindness is a failure to notice a difference between what's there right now and what was there a moment ago.
Scientists such as Daniel Simons from the University of Illinois have spent years devising experiments testing just how perceptive and unperceptive humans actually are.
So we feel like we're aware of everything, that we're taking in all of the details, and that if something important happens, we'll automatically notice it. It'll capture our attention. The reality is that we often don't notice unexpected things because we're aware of far less of our world than we think we are.
So how much or how little are we actually aware of? We decided to recreate one of Simon's most famous experiments to see for ourselves. Here's the setup.
Our senior series producer Vin poses as a lost pedestrian and asks a passerby for directions.
Excuse me, I'm looking for the skyline.
Then, we break the two up, walking through them holding a large sheet of wood. Now watch as I replace Vin. You might think people would notice the switch, but almost half the time, they didn't. Of course, that means more than half the time they did. We only tried the experiment 9 times, and by no means was it good science. But
they've done this in very scientific ways over the years. And yeah, a lot of times people don't notice if the person is different, and it could be gender change, height change, race change. And because your mind tells you that should be the same person, you roll with it.
You are about
Wanted to get to this one because this is so relevant to 9/11, which is today. I have a flashbulb memory of 9/11, which this will explain is probably not accurate. So, really interesting research.
Okay, pop quiz. What did you have for lunch yesterday? What about the day before? How about last Tuesday? You might remember yesterday, but you probably don't remember last week. And even if you have a guess, you might have some nagging doubts that it was something else. Now think of the most vivid memory you have. Maybe it was when one of your grandparents passed away, or when you graduated from high school. or your first breakup. You probably remember all sorts of details from what happened, like where you were, who you were with, and even the exact words someone said or the clothes you were wearing. Psychologists call these super detailed memories flashbulb memories. They get seared into your brain, and you're sure you remember everything about your experience, even years afterward, as if it were yesterday. But even your most vivid memories might not be as reliable as you think they are. I'm Britt Garner, and this is SciShow Psych. The term flashbulb memory was coined by psychologists Robert Brown and James Kulik in 1977 to describe the vivid memories people have after emotionally intense events. Many of the people Brown and Kulik talked to said the events that caused these memories were upsetting events in the news, like the assassinations of President Kennedy or Martin Luther King Jr. We don't know exactly.
Yeah, so for the boomers, those are huge ones that they say they have flashbulb memories about.
Exactly how flashbulb memories form, but based on fMRI brain scans, scientists think two main parts of the brain are involved: the hippocampus, which helps form new memories, and the amygdala, which processes emotions. These memories can be difficult to study because the best way to do a good experiment is after an unexpected major news event, and researchers can't really plan for that in advance. Despite that, we've learned a fair amount over the years. We know, for example, that people create flashbulb memories around traumatic events, but they don't always have to be negative experiences. In 2007, researchers found that both East and West Germans formed flashbulb memories around the fall of the Berlin Wall, regardless of whether they thought it was a good or a bad thing. We also know that even though these memories are super vivid, they're not necessarily accurate. That's probably because people tend to think and talk about vivid memories a lot. Psychologists call this rehearsing a memory, and flashbulb memories can get rehearsed many, many times. But the rehearsal process isn't perfect. Your brain will often try to fill gaps in your memory with things that might feel like they're true, but really aren't. So if you're rehearsing a flash.
And this is like the fish story phenomenon, right? If someone tells you, oh, I went fishing and I caught this fish, like it was this big. But then the next time they tell the story, it was this big, right? And then by the time you get to them telling it the 20th time, the fish was this big, right? And it's not that they're purposely tweaking it. It's just, you know, things get elaborated on each time you rehearse them.
Flashbulb memory, and something fits the pattern of the event you're thinking about, your brain can make it part of the memory without you even realizing. Studies done on flashbulb memories after 9/11 helped confirm this. Researchers realized that the horrible tragedy probably generated flashbulb memories in a lot of people, so they started doing studies. For example, one group at Duke University quickly gathered 54 volunteers and asked them to describe their experiences on that day. The participants were also asked to describe another, more ordinary event that had happened a couple days before. Then, the researchers brought the participants back either 1, 6, or 32 weeks later and asked them to recall both memories. Their descriptions of the ordinary events got less accurate over time, which wasn't surprising. When asked, the volunteers all said that the much more vivid 9/11 memory would be more consistent. But here's the thing. The subjects' memories of what they did on 9/11 were just as inconsistent as the ordinary memories from the same time. People felt like they remembered vivid details from 9/11, but those details were different from what they told to the researchers right after it happened. In fact, 42% of the inconsistencies in both kinds of memories came from the distinctive details the subjects thought were true. In another larger study, 2,000 people were surveyed about their memories of finding out about the terrorist attacks on 9/11. They responded to surveys 1 week, 1 year, 3 years, and 10 years after the attacks, and their memories of the details became less consistent over time. On average, by the time people took the survey 3 years after the attacks, they only remembered 57% of the details accurately, even though they were sure they were remembering right. 10 years after the attacks, the accuracy was about the same, so people's memories got less accurate at first, but then stabilized. So what does this mean for your flashbulb memories? Well, not everything in a flashbulb memory is completely wrong. The basics of what happened are probably accurate, but the vivid details that make it feel so fresh, those are a lot less trustworthy. Even if they feel like they happened yesterday, your flashbulb memories aren't perfect. Thank you for watching this episode of SciShow.
And so I think that's really important because, again, people who have flashbulb memories, they feel really accurate. They feel like I can remember standing in my room, and again, this will date me horrifically. I was in college and it was AOL Instant Messenger. Someone messaged me and said, plane hit the Twin Towers. And I remember just thinking like, oh, what a tragic accident, right? Because you don't think that's happening on purpose. I don't even know if it happened that way because that's very vivid in my mind because that's when I found out. And so it's important to remember that personal experiences, unfortunately, are not always accurate. And to kind of keep that in mind as we use those as things we wait for this. Alrighty, we will continue with this lecture on Wednesday.